All right, last example, I'm going to give you 15 seconds to talk with your neighbor about the similarities and differences of these two distributions. Go. So a couple things you should have noticed is you do have a normal bell curve on the left. On the right, you obviously do not have just a bell curve because you have another node there. Also, the mean, median, and mode are not in the same place, where in the normal distribution they would be. Notice these percentages right here, and these we're going to come across really frequent here. So here is the mean, and then these are the standard deviations. So plus 1 standard deviation is 34% above, and minus 1 standard deviation is 34% below. So plus or minus 1 standard deviation is 68%. It's 68.26, but we're just going to round it to 68. That's the common measurements we will use. 2 standard deviations is 95%. 99.7% is 3 standard deviations. Those are the values that we will use for those. Features of a normal distribution. Well, we can tell that in a normal distribution, it is kind of a bell-shaped. And I'm just writing with my mouse, so handwriting's not the best here. Bell-shaped, and it is symmetrical. The spread, and that's what we're looking at with the standard deviation. Standard deviation, or sigma. And 1 standard deviation, plus or minus 1, is 68%. So be sure you get these written down because these will be very important values that we will use. Plus or minus 2 standard deviations is 95%. And plus or minus 3 standard deviations is 99.7. So all but about 0.3% of the data lies within 3 standard deviations of the center. The center measurements that we look at is the mean or the average, but then also realize that in a normal distribution, the median and the mode are also related. The difference between a frequency distribution and a distribution curve is that a distribution curve smooths out the bumps. So usually a frequency distribution is like a histogram with a lot of squares, but a distribution curve just smooths out the bumps and just makes a nice curve that we can look at. A normal distribution is symmetrical. Be sure that you're filling these out with your notes as we're going along. And if you have any questions, we can pause the video and you can discuss these with your neighbors. The mean, median, and mode are equal in the normal distribution. The frequency curve of a normal distribution is symmetric. A normal curve has points of inflection. So points of inflection, if you remember from one of those examples, that's where it changes from curving upwards to curving downwards. It's just kind of a basic definition of it. A normal distribution has a single node or a single peak. 68% of distribution will be plus or minus 1 standard deviation. 95% will be plus or minus 2 standard deviations. And 99.7% will be plus or minus 3 standard deviations. Okay, let's look at these. Notice here that these three graphs have the same mean. Mean is 3, mean is 3, mean is 3. Standard deviation is 0.5, 1, and 0.25. Talk with your neighbor about why do these curves look so different. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Go. Okay, you should have noticed that if it's the standard deviation of 0.25, so that's really close together. So all the data is very close together within a very small range. That means that 68% of the data is between 2.75 and 3.25. And all of the data basically is within 2.25 and 3.75. So 99% of the data is within 3 standard deviations away from 3. So it's all very scrunched together as compared to a half and even more 1 standard deviation. So 68% is between 2 and 4. So the data is just more spread out when you have a standard deviation that is bigger. Now let's look at these. What does the mean tell us? Well, if these have the standard deviation of 0.25, 0.25, this one the mean is 1 and the mean is 2. So here the mean is above 1 and here it's above 2. Here the mean is at 3. So you can see how that moves the curve. All right. Go through and answer these questions as a partnership. Discuss them in your notes. Put questions and answers in your notes. And then you're ready to do the homework. Thanks for listening.